100 shirts for only $395. 20 shirts for only $100.
Greenleaf Printing and Designs has stupendous signage, printed and embroidered apparel, and promotional products for you. They're at 5526 Burkhart Road in Dayton and on the web at greenleafprinting.com.
My name is Nadine Cichy.
Okay, you are a professor of communications at Sinclair Community College, am I correct?
I'm an assistant professor of communication.
Okay, and I've been having discussions. I don't know if you checked out, we've had a video we did with the mayor of Dayton about the subject. Police department wanted to get some academic perspective, and we're going to hit the streets next to see what people in the streets of Dayton think about the subject. But I wanted to talk about local media. Does the local media hype crime to the point where that's a lot of complaints that we've had is that there's no context to any of it. It's just a constant, snowball of crime and tragedy. From an academic perspective, we talked about how these smiling faces on the news can create something called cognitive dissonance. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that. Anyone who's not, what do you think about this whole subject, and does it create worlds out of context for people? And everything. If there's a body involved, it's leading.
Most of the time, that's true, and there have been complaints, kind of nationwide, of this sort of difficulty where local news organizations will present the most sensational stories they can find, which often involves kind of the scariest situations. Whatever kind of keeps you up at night, they're going to report those stories because they get you to tune in. So a lot of different communities have experienced the situation where people start to complain that when you watch the news, the situation looks far worse than it is in reality. And what we have seen also kind of nationwide as a trend is that local news outlets will report crime, and they'll report singular crimes. So this particular crime happened to so-and-so in this area, and these are the circumstances that surround it. Well, then it develops this idea in people that was never articulated by the media, but that people have nonetheless, that this is common. And so one singular incident sort of becomes a trend in people's eyes, even though the media never actually pointed that out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like they would never say after the story, however, your chances of becoming a victim of a crime are 1 in 136,017, or something like to that effect.
Right. And so by not saying that, people have this tendency to fill in the blanks. And so the story they create for themselves is their own personal story. I mean, you can't necessarily blame the news media for that. But nonetheless, by not saying, in this neighborhood, the chances of a violent crime happening are almost none.
Or this is the first shooting in this neighborhood since 1977, I think that's the biggest thing, at least with the cities that they've complained about, is that, the city of Dayton is a 55 square mile area with, I'm not sure, 50-some neighborhoods, 30, I'm not sure the exact number, in that, and a lot of times the crime is coming from a certain, the majority from a certain area, but yet the entire macro gets labeled, and, people don't, I used to have relatives who wouldn't come in to visit me in the city because they actually thought, they were afraid to get shot going from their car to the house. And
when I lived in downtown Richmond, I had the same experience.
Yes.
People were afraid to come visit, and my neighborhood was very safe. It was being gentrified. The only
thing we ever had was like a car wreck, those were regular because of Wayne Avenue,
and that's kind of it's pretty common nationwide. It's not an experience singular to Dayton. Nationwide crime statistics indicate that crime is down, that it's on a downward trajectory, and that it's lower than it was. And most people, the average person, based on everything they consume, not just the televised news media, but everything they consume, assumes that crime is up, or that crime is at an all-time high, or that crime in particular in downtown neighborhoods is very high. And what most news outlets don't present is that if you put a lot of people into a small space, you're going to see a situation where you might have 5 crimes for a neighborhood, but that neighborhood has more people in it than a comparable square footage area in a suburb. So if you took that small section, let's say 5 blocks, and expanded that into the suburbs, you might actually be looking at, 5 square miles, where you would have to even perhaps go bigger than that to get the same number of people. Because you fit more people downtown than you do in a suburban area. And so once you compare crime statistics based on the actual number of people, you might get a very different picture. But it does make downtown areas look more dangerous.
Yes, and I think the statistics, at least that they've been rattling off at City Hall, is that downtown crime, speaking, downtown Dayton is actually the safest neighborhood in all of Montgomery County.
The Sinclair police, based on the reports that I've read being here, so I get a lot of the communication from the Sinclair police. But the Sinclair police report that Sinclair itself and the area around Sinclair is really very safe. And that the chances of having a crime against a person occur anywhere around campus are very, very low. So that sounds very reasonable, that downtown Dayton is actually quite safe.
Yeah, I mean, there are, like I said, outliers that happen. I mean, we've had like a tragedy at a club, a couple of clubs, and it's usually around alcohol. Your chances, if you're not in a bar parking lot at 3 a.m. in the morning in an argument with someone,
they go down considerably.
They even go way much further down. So, but talk about like students, what do you think the, at least is, what we've been going in our classes, media literacy, how the media works. And a lot of this, since I've been involved, I've been a newspaper editor way back when. It's kind of old hat. Some of it's old hat to me, not all of it. But as far as the basic level of media literacy of people coming into your classes, I've noticed a lot of people in the class are like, wow, I'm not going to look like, I'm not going to look at that news or that show the same way again. What could we do, at least in our public schools, to increase literacy of exactly the way the media works, what their goal is, obviously making money, but at the same time, they always would say that they try to balance those things in editorial. But what can students, what can schools, what can our community do to increase media literacy? So
I think that increasing media literacy in school environments goes with a much bigger issue. So students are or tend to be significantly media illiterate. Most students who take mass communication come in with limited skills in media literacy. But I also notice in my other classes that students kind of share in common a lack of critical thinking skills, something that we used to assume everyone developed. That, and I'm not sure where this happened or how it happened, but I think there's a bigger issue, which is critical thinking. Because in order to be media literate, you have to be able to critically analyze a situation. And we see a lot of students who can tell you, they can reiterate to you.
Tell you what they saw, but not what it means. Or,
right.
Or how,
Or how they feel about it. Well, they can tell you how they feel about it, but not what it might mean to the larger community, what would happen if this pattern continued. It's the pattern creation and the analysis based on large groups of data and synthesizing ideas that seems to not be as present. So I think a big part of what we need to do is look at literacy differently because we used to see literacy as purely the ability to read. Mm-hmm. Can you read words on a page? And at this point, we've achieved literacy relatively well compared to a lot of other countries, which isn't to say that we shouldn't stop literacy efforts. Mm-hmm. But I think we also need to layer on that some other ideas about what it really means to be literate in our information society. We have more information available to us now than at any other point in the past.
Yeah.
So
it's all about discerning which information to, you're going to spend your time with.
But remember also, with every increase in ability, there's a sort of lag time where we have to figure out what we're going to do with it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we are. I don't think it's a situation where someone is trying to keep you from being media literate. I don't think it's a situation where people don't think media literacy is important. I think it's more of an issue of we've recognized this is an issue because it's just now possible to get this much information, but we're not quite sure what to do with that.
Aren't we starting to see people do something with it? And you're seeing like a lot, for example, what I'm doing right now, I've noticed in the past year, I keep my eyes on like what cities, the newspapers and different things they're doing, and there are things like the Dayton Forum are starting to bubble up. Mm-hmm. At first they started on like more of like a small town. I think that's an easier market from like the media. We're starting to do like new media because say like a little town, it's all there. Mm-hmm. The ability to do what I'm doing is basically because it's so incredibly cheap on the production end of it. I don't have any of the legacy costs that the major media have. These vehicles, these salaries, these buildings that they have to pay for. We have an office, a few cameras. We've got a Skype connection. We've done interviews. In the last year, I've interviewed presidential candidates. I interviewed a lot of the main people from Occupy Wall Street last night. It's just been musicians. It's been a fabulous life. But I can do that now, and is it going to be the difference who takes advantage of it and who doesn't?
Historically, that's what happens with the media. So with every major advance in mass communication, we look at it as the great equalizer. People looked at radio that way. People looked at TV that way. People looked at the Internet that way, and still do. And the Internet is this vast untapped resource to a lot of people. Historically, it has been a matter of who takes advantage and who doesn't. But there's also the issue of who is currently in power and what do they want to see happen with the medium. So with TV or radio, as soon as the FCC decided with radio to make advertising illegal, an explicitly legal practice, you see a situation where the companies with the most money to spend on advertising become the most heard. And there is a risk that could happen with the Internet. Doesn't mean it will. It's entirely possible that the people who are currently campaigning to keep the Internet sort of on equal footing for all people who have access to it, it may work, and I hope it does. But historically, that's not the way things kind of shake out.
It's the business interests.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in a capitalist situation, there are a great many benefits that come with capitalism. But one of the risks is that whoever has the most money has more power. They have the ability to buy.
They're the most powerful bullhorn.
Maybe.
You can buy the biggest bullhorn,
In traditional media, that's true. Right now on the Internet, that's not true.
That's true. Because, there are alternative outlets. I'm seeing millions of views on. We've seen, the whole Occupy thing this summer was, tweets and the whole, connecting people socially. So it's got a whole different, it's like you can watch the media and you can talk to your friends about it and organize a gathering all at the same time. But
all of that comes with a risk, too, that if you're not media literate, you could end up reading something that you assume to be true because it's in print.
So where does say someone who's like, gosh, someone told them on the way home that, there's 6 companies that control 99% of the American mass media. And they're like, oh my God, I didn't know this. But I want to find out. I want to become media literate. Or, the first steps to becoming truly, really knowing what the game's all about, who are the players, how it works, how the engine works, and all that. Where does someone go?
My advice, being an academic, would be to go to the most trusted, reliable source you can find, which generally is books and traditional media. Because while traditional media, books, newspapers, TV news, do have a vested interest in protecting themselves, they also are the most closely watched. So if they report something that's simply not true, they're the most likely to get called out on it. So most of the time, what becomes the most valid is, first of all, the ability to look at what's not there and be aware of what's not there. But also to look at those sources and say, well, if they're reporting that 5 companies control most of the recording industry right now, that's probably pretty close to accurate. But they're not going to tell you what else might be happening in that situation. So you have to practice this situation where you're using the mainstream media for accurate information in what they do report. But you're also aware that they may not be reporting everything that you could know about it.
Or just basically ask yourself after every article, every television story or broadcast piece, what didn't they tell me?
And a general rule of thumb also is, if you can find some information in 3 or more sources that have legitimacy, so 3 legitimate sources report the same fact, you pretty much likely it's true. But you also want to read 3 or 4 different sources owned by different companies to see if you can gather more of the story.
And maybe one more other thing, that, like, say if someone's reporting on a government story, maybe go to the government source itself, not exactly for like the government spokesman, but you can look up like agendas on different government meetings now.
I think
do a lot of online research to see if the documents or the paper trail is actually what they say it is or whatever.
If there were one single area where I would like to see more of my students take advantage of the vast quantities of information available to them, it would be in watching the government process. Because so few students take advantage of the information that is widely available, it's transparent, it's there. People don't know how to find it, and they don't take the time to look for it. And so, for example, the congressional record has always been available, and now it's available on the internet. You can find out anything you want to know about a vote, but most people don't. And that is one of those areas of media literacy that I wish that I could encourage more people to do.
Proactive and
go out and find the information that's there. It's not hidden. It's just not on NBC4, which I'm not saying anything about NBC or CBS or ABC.
You can only say so much in 30 minutes in an evening.
Absolutely.
So, okay. Anything else you'd like to add? That's pretty much the end of this interview, I believe. We've hit the subject. So I thank you for your time.